Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the next in the series of our Newcastle Debates. My name's Jane Robinson, and I am Pro Vice-Chancellor for Engagement and Place at Newcastle University, and I'm delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel this evening to discuss how the North East will confront the climate crisis. And I think this is a particularly timely debate. Obviously, a lot of discussion in the weeks running up to COP26, which will be obviously hosted in the UK. But I think as we all look out of our windows, we can see firsthand the impact of more extreme weather that we're facing here. If you are tweeting about the event tonight and want to share your thoughts, please do use the hashtag Newcastle Debates. We've already received some interesting questions from members of the public, and I'm going to be putting those to our panel shortly. But if you would like to join the debate live, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get through as many of your questions as we can. You'll see some opinion polls appear on the screen. Here's the first one now, asking where you're watching from, but let us have your thoughts. So this first poll is about where you're watching from, and we've got 46% from Newcastle, and then a good spread across the region, and a few people from outside of the Northeast as well. So great to have so many people engaging in this important discussion. I'd like now, if I may, just to introduce our panel for tonight. First of all, we have Professor Hayley Fowler. Hayley co-chairs Newcastle's Net Zero Task Force alongside Councillor Nick Forbes, the leader of the council. And Hayley is a Professor of Climate Change Impacts at Newcastle University. Her research focused on an improving physical understanding of our changing weather extremes. So I think very well placed today. She advises government through a number of different roles, including the Science Expert Group for BEIS. She's also a member of the Met Office Hadley Centre Climate Change Programme Science Review Group. So welcome to you, Hayley. We're also joined on our panel by Councillor Claire Penny-Evans. Claire is the Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Public Safety. Claire's worked across the North in the voluntary sector for over 20 years and works for a local charity, Skills for People. As Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Public Safety, Claire's responsible for promoting good community relations, tackling discrimination, and is leading on climate change for the city and plans to improve air quality. So thank you, Claire, for joining us. I now want to pass on to Peter Rolton. Peter is a highly experienced engineer and the UK Chief Executive Officer of British Volt and Chairman of the Rolton Group. He's served for a number of years as a technical government advisor at ministerial level on the UK Renewables Advisory Board, and worked as a strategic partner with some of the world's largest and most successful blue chip multinational companies as they develop strategies for renewable energy. Welcome to you, Peter. And finally, I'm very pleased to be welcoming Elizabeth Mead. Elizabeth is standing in at short notice for Matthew Barn-Walsh, who was unable to join us tonight for personal reasons. But I'm very grateful to Elizabeth, who is the Ethics and Environment representative at Newcastle University Students' Union. Elizabeth is currently studying medicinal chemistry at Newcastle University, and she's joined us from Western Virginia in the United States, so brings a global perspective as well. As ethics and environmental representative, Lizzie works with students and on behalf of students to push forward with the Students' Union sustainable values, ethical responsibilities, and each of our individual roles as global citizens. So that's our panel for tonight. Very much looking forward to the discussion. So we're going to open up with our first question, which is around this question of adaptation or mitigation. Should the climate crisis be addressed through adaptation, living with heat, drought and extreme weather, or mitigation, making more efficient lifestyle choices? So I'm going to ask Hayley to open up in her response to this, and then ask views from the other panels. So over to you, Hayley.
Okay, thanks very much, Jane. And I'm delighted to see so many people here for this debate this evening. It's an interesting question, and one that many people ask. It's clear to me that we need to do both. We absolutely need to mitigate, which is basically reducing our carbon emissions into the atmosphere, and we need to do that as fast as possible. And I know the city and the university have both made commitments to actually reach or try to reach this net zero target by 2030. And the government nationally has made the commitment to try to reach that target by 2050. We also, though, as we've seen quite clearly today, and in many other extreme weather events, certainly this year around the world, we're already living in a changed climate. We've already seen 1.2 to 1.3 degrees of warming actually globally of our global mean average temperatures. And this is making heat waves, forest fires, drought, particularly flood events worse, more frequent, more intense when they happen, affecting more people. So regardless of how much we manage to reduce our carbon emissions, we need to actually learn to live with these extreme events as well. So we need to basically bring in adaptation measures to adapt our infrastructure and our societies to actually live with these extreme weather events. The good news is that research suggests that actually as soon as we manage to reach these net zero targets, we will stop seeing warming continuing. So, if we manage to basically stop putting carbon into the atmosphere, the world will stop warming, and that's fairly robust science. So once we can basically change the system to net zero, we should be able to remove, or not remove, these extreme weather events, but it will stop getting worse, I suppose. So we should all try and do what we can.
Thanks, Hayley. I think a lot of us have sort of heard about the discussions around net zero, and as you say, a number of organisations have in the city have committed to net zero by 2030 in terms of how we can actually reduce those carbon emissions. I don't know, Claire, do you want to pick up on those points that Hayley's been making?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and hello to everybody. It is great to be here. I think in Newcastle we are in quite a unique position in when Hayley talked about the university and the City Council pledging to be net zero by 2030, but we've also got the Hospital Trust as well, and our Hospital Trust was one of the first in the country to declare a climate emergency, and is actually using its influence to make sure that the National Health Service looks at how it can decarbonise as well. So, for a city, we're in a really unique position where we've got quite a lot of our anchor institutions who are all talking from the same hymn book, all wanting to get to the same point in time in terms of combating carbon emissions. And that included Northumbria University and the City College, as well as businesses in the city as well. And it's great because we can come together in our net zero task force and discuss what we're going to do in terms of our plans around decarbonisation. But I think Hayley makes a really good point in the fact that we can't just do that by itself. We do have to look at other things, whether that's what we do around potential to combat flooding, like we've seen some flooding events today across the city. We need to be looking at what we can do around around the River Tyne, and what we can do around to mitigate those. We've got a big project on a flood barrier, looking at undertaking some work in that area. But also we need to look at what we do in terms of heat waves as well, and whether that's greening the city with more trees and creating canopies for heat waves. So I think we do have to do a two-pronged approach with this, but I do think in Newcastle, certainly we're in a really good position because of our collaboration and our partnership working.
Yeah, I think Newcastle as a place is certainly leading the way in terms of, as you say, Claire, the commitment of big organisations. And Peter, it's obviously that sort of balance of mitigation and adaptation is something that I guess from an industry point of view is something that you've considered as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I saw the question there was actually about, you know, should we just basically try and live with the climate crisis through adaptation? I have to say absolutely not, because this is only the start. And if you look at all the research work that's been done, the first effects of climate change are extreme weather patterns, and we are now all seeing extreme weather patterns. So this is not the end of the journey. I'm afraid this is only the sort of start of the disaster. It only gets worse from here unless we take actions. One of the, I suppose, encouraging things is that businesses are now starting to wake up to this. And in fact, there was a saying, it was, I think, the American President Coolidge that said, you know, the business of business is just business. That's very much now not the case, and businesses are required now to have a very strong environmental, social and governance agenda, and that environmental agenda is very much now being driven now by the need to go for net zero carbon. Again, we know with British Volt, we're basically a startup business, but already the investors into our business are asking us, what is our 2050 vision? They don't want to hear just about what we're doing in the right here and now. They want to know where will the business be in 2050. They want to know it's going to be net zero carbon. They want to hear that we're going to build our batteries entirely out of green electricity, and they want to know that we're going to have an environmentally managed supply chain, you know, with as much local vertical integration as possible. And I think, you know, you've got when you've got the financial institutions actually saying to you, we'd rather see a strong ESG agenda than just a few more points on the bottom line, that to me is hugely encouraging, because it means doing the right thing now is also good business. And I think finally, the other thing that's really encouraged me a lot has been with graduates who have been coming into our business recently. They've been coming to work for us in preference to wanting to go for businesses that have, you know, traditional oil and gas type backgrounds, because they don't want to actually spend their career working in those industries. They're picking, you know, the best graduates now are starting to pick the industries they see as the future.
Thank you, and I think that's a neat segue, Elizabeth, into you in terms of the perspective as a student and future graduates.
So I think it's definitely a combination of both factors here. I mean, to use a metaphor which is way smaller than what it represents, when you get cold, you put on a sweater as such. And by inventing things like this, we as humans have managed to adapt to our environment, and we can certainly do so again. However, that metaphor kind of falls apart a bit when you realize it's about 1 million times harder to adapt to climate change than to adapt to a slightly chilly students' union. So I would say there still needs to be a lot of like political and corporate action going on there in order to adapt, because I mean, in order to truly adapt, we really need to change a lot of the way that we do things. I say this partially from a scientific perspective, but not from chemistry, just the common sense that figuring out solutions to complicated problems takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of experimentation, it takes a lot of trial and error, and you make mistakes, so it'd be very difficult. As for mitigation, well, I think mitigation is definitely possible and it's a good idea. However, I won't say that's due to simply more efficient lifestyle choices, because I mean, even though there are lots of things that we can personally do that use less energy, a lot of those aren't going to have much of an impact in the long run. I mean, for example, as a student, a lot of us don't have cars, so we walk or bikes to class. And while that certainly saves us money and energy, and it's also very good exercise for us, I don't think we're really doing anything about the climate when we do that, at least not on a really meaningful level. That said, I can imagine in a world of the future where we have more energy efficient transportation, fewer cars, and things like that, in which we've aimed to mitigate and adapt by changing lifestyle entirely. Walking and biking will be good skills to have, because in a world where everyone's doing that, I think that really will change things. However, the overall shape of transportation and society would need to change first. And there are plenty of other industries that's just one that I think most people can relate to.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think we'll come back to that theme of transport, certainly. And I think those comments around, you know, how much of this is to do with individuals and the actions that we take in our everyday lives, and how much is it to do with large organisations? So perhaps we can move on to that question, and we've got some questions in the chat as well that I'll try and weave in here. So we've got another poll here around where the main responsibility should lie in tackling climate change. And I'm asking the question of the panel, can individuals really influence climate change, or does it have to be with those large organisations and governments? So we'll give people a moment to pick up on that. But perhaps, Claire, can I start with you on that question? Where does the responsibility lie?
Sorry, and that mute button. Well, I think there is a sort of feeling, isn't there, about if we just concentrate on individuals, we let bigger organisations and corporations and governments off the hook. But I think it is a case of that we all have to take our own part. And like for us as a city council, we've got our net zero action plan, we're working in partnership, but there are lots of things that we cannot do. There are a lot of things where our hands are tied because we haven't got necessarily the powers to implement procedures or policies on certain things. There are lots of things where we're tied because obviously after 10, 11 years of austerity as a city council, we've got hardly any money. So we know we have to bid into various sources. So there are certain things that I think individuals who are you know, we've got very vulnerable people in our city. I would hate to think that we were saying that they had to do their bits, and even though sometimes all they can think about is whether or not they can have enough money to put the heating on, let alone feed themselves. And again, in terms of the city council, you know, like I said, we are limited. So for me, we've all got to play our part, but actually ultimately it's got to come from a much higher level. I think national government needs to play much more of a role in helping local government, and again at a higher level as well. That's why I think COP26 is so great, because we can all come together and put pressure on. But I do think individuals can also do things around, you know, I think what Peter was saying before about businesses are recognizing that individuals will spend their money in places that might have on businesses that might have green credentials. So, you know, we can use the power of our pound as individuals, we can use our voice in the things that we do, we can vote in certain ways. But for me, everybody's got a part to play, but there are some things that we're all limited in the fact that we all have different controls over different aspects of the overarching thing that we can do to combat this.
There's a specific question in the chat. It's interesting, the polls come back with quite an emphasis on national government, although I think for me, I was almost wanting to have a button that said all of the above, because I think, as you say, Claire, it is absolutely about a combination of these different organisations. But one of the questions was around the role of citizens how And obviously the North of Tyne has recently had a report from their citizens panel. How can some of those things actually start to really have an impact, do you think?
So in terms of the Citizens Assembly, I mean, that was a partnership across all 3 local authorities with the North of the Tyne. And certainly some of the things that have come from that are things that are already in our net zero action plan. So that was really pleasing for us to see. I think it is a case of people sort of listening to what's being said and engaging more people, because I feel very much that, you know, our net zero action plan came from our summit that we had. We had a call for evidence. So we put out a call for evidence and had thousands of people put the information into that. And then we had a summit on what the key priorities were for our city, but certainly feeding in from these citizens' assemblies, because it's about engagement and bringing people with you and having people be the champions of the things that we need to do. So to be telling other people about what they need. So it doesn't always have to be the people who are already committed to climate change. It's about engaging with all of our communities so they all understand the role that they can play. And that's what I think citizens' assemblies can do.
Thank you for that. And Peter, from your perspective, I mean, there's often a sort of emphasis on what large corporations can do in the context of the climate emergency. But and you reflected a little bit on this. But what else would you want to add in terms of that? You know, where does that responsibility lie?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said there should be a button that said all, actually. And it's quite interesting you said about government should do more. I mean, our government's recently generated a fuel shortage to try and get us all out of our cars, and look what trouble that's caused for everybody. But no, I mean, you know, this is a responsibility for absolutely everybody, not just businesses, not just governments. It has to start with the individual. You know, the choices you make. Go and buy an electric car. I would say that, wouldn't I? We're in the business of making the batteries for them. But it's very interesting. I mean, we were one of the sponsors at the Goodwood Festival of Speed this year, which, you know, is real petrol head sort of heaven, really. But one thing that was very noticeable to me was that whilst everyone was sat looking over the hay bales, watching the cars shred their tyres and produce, you know, ridiculous amounts of fumes out the back, they were going out the back. Supercar paddock was empty. Electric Avenue, which was full of all the electric vehicles that are coming to market in the next few years, was absolutely rammed. And if anybody's just tried to order an electric car recently, they probably had a huge dose of disappointment when they found out how long it's going to take. I mean, I just put my name down for one. It was 52 weeks for a delivery slot. So, you know, the times very much are changing. Has to start with the individual. You know, it's the choices you make. It's how you choose to travel. It's what you choose to buy. It's how you choose to heat your home. That said, right, there is a role for government, and the role for government is in actually facilitating the individual to be able to make those change, so that when you do want to take your gas boiler and you want to get rid of it and you want to swap it for an air-to-water heat pump, you know, the right incentivization has to be there to make that a cost-effective, you know, choice for you as an individual to do the right thing. So I think government by policy and stimulus, individual by choice.
Thanks, Peter. And Hayley, I know you spend quite a lot of time advising government on you know, how policies on how to respond to this based on the evidence that we're seeing. What's your reflections?
Yeah, probably a little bit different. So, I mean, I was staggered, for example, just to give you an example of how difficult this transition is going to be. To get to only 1.5 degrees of warming, to basically stay below that critical threshold that was recommended in the Paris Agreement, we need to reduce our carbon emissions internationally by about 7.5% a year. And that's because we've got so little carbon budget left to actually reach that target. If we think about COVID and how much of a change everybody made to their lifestyles during lockdown last year, we only reduced global emissions by 6.5%. So with that massive change, reduction in air travel, people working from home, just not buying things, we didn't actually reach that target we needed to reach the 1.5 degree target. So we need staggering changes, systemic changes in the way we actually behave and the way we produce energy. And I think that's the important thing. So yes, we are all responsible. Although I will say that it's the oil companies themselves that came up with this idea of individual responsibility and individual carbon budgets. So pushing the blame onto the individual rather than the sort of fossil fuel companies themselves. We can influence change. We can vote for different governments. We can put our money into different investments. We can, push the university, for example. I know the university's divested from fossil fuels, for example, because of student pressure. We as individuals can make those decisions, and we have to make those decisions. But at the same time, we live in a society that's based on economic growth, which is linked to the use of energy, and that energy is ultimately mostly generated through fossil fuels. So the government has to basically reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, but it also has to enable people who can't pay to retrofit their homes to make those changes that are needed to, we need to basically reduce our carbon emissions very fast. We can't afford to wait for people to kind of make those decisions individually. So the government needs to step up and actually needs to bring funding to the fore to actually allow people to make these difficult decisions and to make it easy for them. So I think it's about a little bit about the individual, but it's mostly about the government actually and doing the right thing. But as individuals, we can vote for that government that we want.
Thanks, Hayley. And I think the point that you make around a just transition and recognising that actually, I think one of the kind of key things is enabling people who might not have the means to be able to access and make those choices because of their own circumstances can be supported to do so. And there's a number of comments in the question answers about how we can actually ensure that there is a just transition, that we have that kind of environmental justice is a really important theme. And I want to move on now and come to Elizabeth to really build on this sort of question around what we could be doing. We often hear a sort of very strong voice from young people around climate action. And I wonder, Elizabeth, about what you feel, whether there's more that we should be doing through education and training to support the efforts of young people in terms of accelerating climate action.
So I guess, okay, at risk of just pushing a self-promo in here, I definitely think one of the first things people should do is read an article that I wrote for the student union newspaper, The Courier, about a year ago, called "What Environmental Education Gets Wrong." It's just the first thing that comes up on Google when you put that phrase in. Would it be all right if I shared it in the chat? Okay, I'm sharing this in the chat so everyone can read this. It's completely free to read. You don't have to subscribe or anything. And in that article, I talked about how it seems that a lot of adults, or, well, in the case of higher education, like professors and people with authority, a lot of them say, oh, it's great that young people care about the environment. But their idea of young people caring about the environment is them doing some like small isolated projects that acts as a learning experience. But then when students actually try to push any sort of institutional change, which actually makes them even slightly uncomfortable, they're like, no, that's disrespectful, stop it. So I think that honestly the best thing that should be done through education and training is for educational institutions to be open to like long-lasting institutional change, which actually requires like changing the structure of the curriculum or changing various logistical things such as more environmentally friendly suppliers or divesting from things or things like that, which are very, very large and take place over the long term. Because even though I do think a lot of small scale environmental education initiatives are well intentioned, they typically don't have a lasting impact. For instance, last year in my chemistry course, we had to do a project where we wrote a paper on green chemistry. And I think that was very informative. It taught us a lot about it. But the framing of it was, oh, here's an interesting thing for you to learn about, not, hey, this should be the baseline for everything you do because we are in a climate emergency. It was sort of a, oh, look, we care about the environment, read this. But whenever it came to other things in the course, we didn't really talk about it much at all. So it's seen as an add-on rather than like a part of the inherent life philosophy, which I mean, I think you can generalize to society in general, though. I mean, people don't think about the environment as like a baseline value when it comes to designing any sort of system, much less education. The environment is just sort of, at best, it's sort of covered in a very superficial way that focuses on individual efforts, and at worst, it's sort of chosen as a like safe, controversial topic, because it's something that everyone's sort of heard about, and it prevents people from actually having to discuss things such as colonialism or human trafficking or other sorts of like larger issues that they don't want to approach, because if they're talking about the environment, then they can just talk about trees all day.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I mean, I think so, a sort of very strong sense that actually we need to think about meaningful engagement over a long term. Claire, can I come to you, because I know it's something that through the city there's been a lot of thinking about how to have that meaningful engagement over a long term, particularly with younger people. And I know we've been involved together in looking at climate change summits and so on. But do you want to respond to some of the sort of challenges that I think Elizabeth's put out?
I think Elizabeth makes some valid points, especially around the whole kind of thing around the curriculum and engaging with young people. I do know, though, that, you know, having had two children who have gone through the years of doing GCSEs and stuff, where, you know, that young people are much more engaged, because also there has been aspects on the curriculum for a long time, whether that's in geography or chemistry, there has always been a little bit more, and they're far more informed than I was at that age. But I think there needs to be more engagement with young people, and more. And I know that the North of the Tyne, we mentioned the North of the Tyne before, has done some work around having climate change teachers in schools. And I think that's really good. And I certainly think that the whole idea of reinvigorating eco schools is a good idea as well. And one of the things we've been doing is looking at how to make the decarbonisation via the public sector decarbonisation fund. We've been including our schools in that and looking to make some of our schools net zero schools. And part of that, as well as part the solar panels and the heat pumps, but also enabling perhaps schools to think about how they can use this technology to influence children's learning. So perhaps creating teaching resources around the different energy, looking at how heat pumps are working, looking at what that school is emitting so that we can see it in real time. So I think there is lots to do. We've got I know that Elizabeth said about tokenistic like events type of things, but we have got an exciting event coming up in October half term. And if there is any young people who are aged between 16 or 18, or anyone knows any young people, please go to our Net Zero webpage, because we've got a summit for that age group, which is going to be linking up with some young people from Nancy in France and some young people in the global south to do a debate. And it's at the Tyneside Cinema, and it's a very digital interactive debate, so they can tell us what we need to be doing, because it's not just about doing these events where there is something that you need to do as a project. It's about listening to the voices and hearing and the ideas and engaging with those young people. And I think also that young people can also be a bit of a pester power for parents as well, to get them involved as well. So I take on board things that Elizabeth said, but I think it's really important that we continue to do these summits and engage with young people, but we need to look at how we can include it more in the curriculum.
Thanks, Claire. And I know, Hayley, that's something that you've spent some time looking at, sort of engaging, particularly with schools and young people on this. Do you want to sort of add to the points that other panellists have made on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that quite honestly, we need to completely overhaul the national curriculum. What I've seen, I mean, for in terms of what it contains about climate change, it's nowhere near enough. I absolutely agree with you, Elizabeth, about this emphasis. I just don't think adults get it, actually. I think young people are much more awake to what's going on, and you guys are going to have to live with it for a lot longer than we are. I really do think young people sort of see it for how it is. And it is a crisis, and we do need to act very rapidly. Like we reacted during the war, we need huge amounts of funding to address the problem. And at the moment, if you look at the national curriculum, we look at the benefits of global warming. I mean, basically, there's as much on the benefits as there is on the issues associated with it. It is so out of date. So national curriculum needs to be overhauled. I do a lot of work with schools around climate change and, bringing people together and activities and things like that. But I mean, I've also had discussions, as you know, Jane, with the university, with our Deputy Vice Chancellor, who's very engaged in this area. And it'd be very interesting to talk to you about this afterwards, Elizabeth, but and bring you into the discussion as well. But embedding climate education throughout the curriculum, certainly at this university, but thinking about how we do that across the board in terms of UK universities is something that we've been thinking about in the COP26 universities group. So it's a group of academics who are kind of giving advice to governments, providing scientific briefings and things for the run up to COP26, which is obviously in Glasgow very soon. And I think it's absolutely key. We all need to know more about it. We all need to be better educated, to give us that understanding and the skills to deal with this, because it's going to be part of our lives for a very, very long time to come.
Thank you. And I think just want to pick up, Hayley, on that point about skills and perhaps come to Peter, because, one of the things that I often hear is that, the skills that we're going to need for dealing with both the challenges, but also, the potential opportunities around that are linked to the green economy and green growth is a real challenge. So from your point of view, Peter, how do you see that kind of the way in which we support and ensure that we have the kind of the right skills and training to support, particularly our young people into these future roles?
So I think one of the big challenges there, of course, is, and I do sympathise with schools, is actually just trying to keep up to date with the rate at which, the world is moving and, what green jobs are. I mean, who knew that, becoming a battery cell designer would be a career that was is absolute gold dust? I mean, we're practically going around the world kidnapping people off the streets to fill our vacancies on designing the chemistry for sustainable cells to go into electric vehicles. So there's a need, really, I think, for a lot more sort of future engineering in the sense that, you know, the jobs that we, you know, as adults think about and the careers we think about are not the careers of the future. A lot of these are the careers of the past, okay? And we really need to help, you know, schools get their head around trying to get, you know, and advise young people about that direction of travel, you know, into what does a net zero carbon world look like, and what are the jobs and skills you're going to need going to be. I mean, that's a more sort of practical local level, and, you know, and setting up business in the northeast. You know, we're dealing with a workforce in parts that have, you know, been brought up on a diet of shipbuilding and mining, and those are industries that certainly mining is a thing of the past, and that's definitely not coming back. The shipbuilding's gone overseas. So, you know, you're looking really at a re-education program and a reskilling program, completely from scratch for some people. We have some people that will come to us that are sort of perhaps ready to start training with us. But we've even taken the, you know, the perhaps almost extreme set of setting up our own charity that is going to work with people that need educating really, or re-educating right from the get-go all the way through, you know, through the various steps, even around things like adult literacy and numeracy and life skills, to get them ready to engage with a, you know, a job in the in this new sort of green economy. But I think I come back to my original point. You know, the issue I think is, as adults, you know, you sit and advise your children about careers. Your advice is probably very dated. You know, they need to be thinking about the future jobs in this space, not the jobs that you think you know about.
Thank you, and I think, Peter, that point that, you know, actually the sort of roles that potentially you're looking for at the minute, you know, you're looking at a kind of global level to potentially bring people to the region, and it's a great opportunity, I think, to think about how we can provide that skills and training so that people can access those roles. Elizabeth.
So, speaking to what Peter said on how parents often have somewhat dated advice for their children about careers. One thing which I've been very fortunate in with regards to this is that a lot of my family members are really interested in the sciences, just like I am. So they're constantly telling me about like job opportunities or like PhD slots opened up. But not everyone's family is like that enthusiastic about their passions. So like I really think that like parents being like on top of what their children want to do with regards to like the current climate, I think is really important, because having that sort of support from your family can really make or break your career when you're a young person in today's world.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I think that's absolutely right. As a parent of teenagers as well, I can empathise with a number of the panel's comments. I want to pick up some of the questions and themes that are coming through the Q&A, and I guess this sort of balance that we've been talking about between, you know, big global initiatives and local community action, and there are examples in across the world of where very localized community action has made a real difference. And just wanted to ask the question from the panel around whether you feel we should be supporting and encouraging more community-led initiatives that support local communities in becoming carbon neutral. So can I maybe perhaps start off with Claire on this? Just should we, and how can we?
I think the answer would be yes. I think any encouragement we can do to get people engaged in this is welcomed, really. I was just going to come back in before, because when you were talking about green jobs, because I recently visited a pilot that we have with E.ON, where we've got 17 flats. And we've just done some work about installing a ground source heat pump there, and there were 17 flats. And that's not just only to combat fuel poverty, because it will, but also to look at, you know, how we can look at decarbonise some of our housing. And on that visit to look at those, we met an amazing young man who started off working for E.ON in heat pumps at the age of 16 and is now like the site manager, because, you know, he's just gained all these skills in an area, probably like what Peter was saying before, where he's been in at the beginning of heat pumps and he's got to this stage. So, you know, the what we're doing around heat pumps is really creating jobs as well for people who are interested in, you know, jobs at entry level, apprenticeships, but also around, you know, people who might be gas engineers if we're going to get rid of, you know, the gas in our homes. So that's really good. But that's a small pocket of where there's 17 flats where we'll be able to get them involved as well in looking at what they're doing. And I think what we can do around with communities is to help them in any way that we can. So if we do have a community that's really engaged, it's about making sure that we can support them in what they would need to do, whether that's energy audits or looking at district heat pump systems, or whether it's like looking at what we can do around greening an area. So I think I would really welcome that people were involved in things like that. I know that certainly some of our communities are really engaged, but for me it's not just about the really engaged communities. So it goes back to that topic. I think we were talking about individuals before. I think we should encourage the communities that are really engaged, but I think we need to do a lot more support and engagement with those communities that perhaps are not fully engaged with the topic.
Thanks, Claire. And I guess, Peter, I know British Volt is sort of looking, and you've got the map of Northumberland behind you, but looking at development in southeast Northumberland around Blythe, and I don't know, from your perspective as an organisation looking to work in that part of Northumberland, how important is it to you to have that kind of local community engagement?
Yeah, so it's important, and I'm going to start by saying it's Camis, not Blythe, before someone puts it in the Q&A, okay, because they will do, okay. Blythe, the other side of the river, we're in Camis, okay. But I think, you know, I think actually there's a couple of really, really big things we need to fix first, and I just want to put these on the table because time's starting to run short now, okay. And, you know, we talked earlier about needing to fix the national curriculum, that we actually need to fix the national grid, because at a very, very fundamental level, if you look what climate change is about, it is about nature behaving badly and going out of control. And over here, we've got the solution, which is renewable energy, right? And we talk about, you know, getting to net zero carbon. That means taking out the gas boiler. It means that for the hospitals, it means no great big, you know, gas boilers or oil boilers sat in the boiler house. You're going to have to basically run the, you know, society on renewable electricity as a replacement for fossil fuels. But, okay, nature's in the driving seat on generation, okay? It's not like spinning reserve where you can turn it on and off. So to actually harness this, you need, you know, you need this sat in the middle. You need batteries, okay? And we need a fundamental shift in how the national grid is organised, how we account for energy, and more importantly, how we use it. Because at the moment, everything's based around time of day tariffs. Now, what we really need is we need a situation where, you know, if you think about, you know, say the coast of Scotland in December and it's blowing an absolute gale at 2 in the morning, you're producing more wind energy than actually there is a load for. So you need to be able to generate that load, which means turning things on. Now, we have a thing called the internet. It's in most houses. We haven't got to reinvent that, thankfully. So, you know, why not, you know, address fuel poverty by turning on immersion heaters and giving everyone a very, very cheap tank of hot water, because guess what? You're going to chuck that power away anyway because you've got too much of it. So the whole emphasis needs to shift away from fixed tariffs, time of day, and put it back in the fact that you've got nature driving and use load generation and use a lot of energy storage to really buffer that out, because then you can start to create a tariff regime where you've got plenty of cheap renewable energy. And electricity in this country is far too expensive. It really is, okay? If you look around the rest of Europe to what they're paying for electricity and its green credentials, we are in the wrong place to make this happen. So we've really got to tap the renewables. We've got to change the tariff structure. We've got to change the way the national grid is organised, and we've got to address these things. So everyone's incentivised to go, you know what, I don't need gas because actually my electric's now so cheap. Okay, I can switch to electric. I can switch to being renewable. Okay, and I can actually make that change. But we're not going to get there the way we're currently legislated with the National Grid and the Electricity Act. It needs a government really that's brave enough, I actually think, to tear all that up and frankly start again.
Yeah, I think that's a very clear example of where you know, we can influence and hopefully make a big shift in terms of national policy direction as far as that's concerned. And I guess also the fact that we can capitalise on the fantastic resources we do have in terms of renewables here in the northeast, which I think makes, you know, potentially makes us very attractive to businesses to be able to see this is where you can access your renewables. But as you say, there's a big challenge there around the grid. Hayley, do you want to come in on the back of Peter's point, or that kind of wider question of working with communities and with central government?
Yeah, I mean, I think often the people who aren't engaged in this are quite low emitters, actually. They're often perhaps don't have the, as you were saying before, in terms of a just transition, they often don't have the resources to change. These are the, you know, type of projects that Claire was talking about. I think it's you know, in terms of really reducing carbon, it's actually the very rich that we need to be focusing on the most, and how you actually get them to change, I have no idea. But you know, 10% of the global population emit 50% of our emissions, and you know, there's some people who are super emitters, as you can imagine, taking private planes everywhere, all of this kind of thing. So you know, it's an interesting question. Maybe we need some kind of minimum carbon budget that everybody gets, and then these kind of super emitters have to pay a huge amount of money to basically fund these sort of community-led schemes. Actually, I don't know how. I mean, either the government has to fund this type of thing, or we have to tax people to try and recoup that money to fund it. I mean, I think in general, though, you need to have community buy-in for any of these type of things. If we want to elicit behaviour change, we need community buy-in from the general population. We can do that through education. I don't disagree with you, Peter, either. You know, in terms of electricity in this country is crazily expensive. I suppose the problem with renewables is that eventually electricity almost becomes free. So that's a potential issue as well. Yeah, I'll finish there, Jane.
Thank you. We are coming to the end of our debate, and we've got lots of questions that I'm really sorry we haven't had time to get to. But I do want to just sort of give each of the panel members, we have a question that's come in around, if you could ask everyone here to do one thing to mitigate climate change, what would it be? And I think based on what we've talked about today, you know, it's not just a question of the individuals who are here engaging with this debate, but if I can just very quickly go around the panel members and say, you know, what would be, if you really wanted to see a change around climate action, what would be the one thing? And it doesn't have to be individuals, it could be government, or it could be your own organisation. So I think I'll start with Hayley. What would you want to see? What would your one wish be? So just 30 seconds from everyone, please.
I think domestic heating. So, I mean, that's the big one. 30% of all emissions comes from domestic heating. So it's really people thinking, can they change? If you change, your neighbour's likely to change. Studies have shown this. So if you can afford to change, perhaps think about it.
Thank you very much. And Peter, for you, would it be the grid?
Well, get rid of the national grid in its current form. But I'm going to follow what Hayley said. Great British icons, you know, policemen, you know, Coldstream guards, you know, letterboxes, gas boilers. We have the biggest and best gas grid in the world, and that's a problem because it's dead easy to use. And actually, we've either got to stop using it, or we've got to fill it with biogas, all right, which is renewable. But even better, actually, would be rewire the country, get everyone air to water heat pumps, sort out the grid tariff structure, and make it pay to go green and stop using fossil fuels.
Yeah, making it pay to go green. I think that's a very strong call. Elizabeth, to you next.
I would say that the one thing everyone should do to mitigate climate change is to stop being afraid of questioning institutions and government. I've noticed that often we as students, we aren't necessarily concerned about say respecting like the rights or like feelings of others or respecting certain laws with relation to things like, I don't know, staying out late, drugs, things like that. But then they'll turn around and will just totally unquestioningly accept whatever the university or the government does, and I think that needs to stop, especially as the most effective climate change things I've been involved in have been movements by the People and Planet Society to get the uni to divest from fossil fuels and publishing climate change articles in the Courier as a science editor. And I really think those actions which really involve making lots of people aware of things and being critical of society and has been the most effective thing. And if we are too afraid of uncertainty and don't embrace the chaos, I really don't think things are going to turn out too well.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And finally, Claire, what would your key wish be?
Well, I kind of agree with Hayley and Peter, but I think because I know that the emissions in our city are a third transport, and then the rest of it is energy, whether it's a third in homes or energy in other sources. But for me, I'm going to just say that for me, one of the big things I think we need to in our region is we need to have more powers of devolution powers, and we need to have transport powers for that, so that we can have things like integrated ticketing systems, so we can encourage people to use, you know, the bus fares in Newcastle to get, you know, we know how much it costs. We know, you know, it's ridiculously expensive compared to how much it costs to use public transport in London. And then if you're coming from Northumberland and you want to then get to the metro or you want to use other things, it's just that, you know, one ticket system would really make a big difference for people. So it's integrated transport, and it's more devolution around the powers around transport, so we can make public transport more accessible and cheaper for everybody to be able to use.
Thank you very much. And I think we've got some really ambitious and important ideas there that hopefully we'll collectively be able to take forward to COP26. That's all we have time for this evening. I thank you so much to all our panel for their contributions, to Professor Hayley Fowler, Councillor Penny Evans, Peter Rolton and Elizabeth Mead. And thank you also to you, our audience, for joining us tonight and for your stimulating questions as well. We do hope you'll be able to join us for our next debates, which will be scheduled early in the next year. Details will be announced on the Newcastle Debates website shortly. And if you'd like to receive information about upcoming events, you can also subscribe to our email mailing list at the address which will be on screen shortly. We do value your feedback, so we'd be really grateful if you could please complete the short questionnaire at the end of this event. So thank you once again to all our panellists, to our audience for your contributions. I hope despite the challenge and weather, you have an enjoyable evening, and we hope to see you at another event soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.